Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have some terrifying encounters that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. Before we get into these encounters, though, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version. They were written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those books are in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload. Tuesday, February 16th, I was lying in my bed at around midnight. At the time, only my dad was home, but he was asleep. I'd been in my room for the past few hours watching a speed run, and nothing was out of the ordinary. I did not have my headphones in at the time, so I could hear everything, and, up till that point, the only thing I could sense was the video on my laptop. Well, shortly after the clock rolls over to tomorrow, this putrid, horrid, rotten, sulfuric stench fills my room. I instantly thought there was a backup in the house. I went all over the house, but as far as I could tell, the smell only came from my room. Specifically by the windows overlooking the backyard. It was getting late, so I doused the room in air freshener and turned a fan on and went to sleep that night. Wednesday, the 17th, I'm in bed again. I should mention that when I'm in my bed, my back faces the backyard windows. Again, right around midnight, the smell returns. This time, though, there's scratching at my window. I turn to look, the scratching stops, the smell is still there, though. I got dressed and went outside to see if an animal had somehow gotten up to my window. Now, it isn't a second-story window, but it's still about 10 feet off the ground. There were no tracks, and the smell was even worse out there, and only existed right outside of my window. I was more spooked than yesterday, but I decided that the scraping I heard was one of my neighbor's garbage cans scraping against the chain-link fence. Fast forward to the 18th, Thursday. I'm in bed again. Like clockwork, at midnight the scratching and smell returns. I'm dead tired from work though, so this night I don't have the energy to look into what's causing it, so I fall asleep. While sleeping, I dreamt of my room. It wasn't sleep paralysis, as I've experienced this before. The smell was worse than it had ever been. I was almost throwing up. Then, standing on my windowsill was this creature I had never seen before. It was like a deer, except it walked on its hind legs. Its front two were tucked in, like how a dog acts when he wants a treat. It hopped along my windowsill. Its skin was brown and patchy. The eyes were what caught my attention the most. They were like headlights. There were no pupils or anything, just large beams of light. I found myself staring at them. I don't know how long I did, but eventually I mumbled a single word. Skinwalker. And everything disappeared and I woke up. I have no idea what's going to happen tonight. I have a dream catcher that a professor gave me years ago. I'm going to hang that over my bed tonight. There has not been any updates to that. Today's second part of the upload. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I saw something I still can't explain. I was asleep in my bed. It was the middle of the night. My mom had taken down my curtains to wash earlier in the day, leaving the blinds to be illuminated by the moonlight. I woke up for some reason and could see a figure standing in front of or behind the blinds, a stark contrast to the illuminated blinds. My mind, for some reason, was not frightened by this image. I thought it was my dad or someone else I trusted for some odd reason. I sat up in my bed and the shadow appeared to jump in surprise and ran across the window. I got up, still not scared, as I should have been by a long shot, and went to my parents' bedroom to ask what my dad was doing outside of my window. They didn't believe me. My bedroom was on the second floor with no ledge in front of my window, and no other way to replicate this. Today's third part of the upload. In late 2019, my girlfriend and I moved into a small house on the outskirts of the city with 7,000 people in eastern Ohio. I knew of Bigfoot growing up, but assumed, even if it was real, I'd never see one. I was up one night at around 4 in the morning. I was in my living room with the AC on in the window. My cat was sleeping in the chair beside the couch. Both were to my left. I hear a very faint growl come from my left and assume it's my cat. I look over and he's staring directly where I hear the noise coming from. As I'm listening, I can hear the noise getting louder, very steadily but slowly. We look at the window for maybe 10 to 20 seconds until the growling becomes louder than the AC itself. Then there's a loud bang on the side of my house. It sounded like someone running into padded walls in the gym. It shakes the window, the AC. I've never seen my cat run so fast in my life. His fur was all puffed out for the rest of the night. This alone obviously freaked me out, but I've never considered Bigfoot. I assumed it was a black bear or a deer and laughed it off until a couple weeks later when I was working. I'm a 911 operator. I went out to check it the next day and there was no damage that I could see. So now I'm telling my sergeant about this, and he mentions Bigfoot. He also mentioned a report taken in our county where a guy in his late teens had crashed his car, claiming he swerved to miss a Bigfoot. I found the article from years ago, and it said it happened on the road that I live on, less than a half a mile away. They also noted he didn't act like he was under the influence. For a couple of months around that time, I had also noticed tapping on the windows that almost sounded like tiny pebbles hitting the windows. Nothing like that has happened since, but I did notice something strange I didn't mention. There's never noise coming from the woods behind my house at night. I've gone out dozens of times in all seasons and all weather and never heard anything back there. It's this thin patch of woods, maybe 1,000 feet wide and a couple of miles deep, but it leads to a large section of woods. It has a stream and cornfields all around it. It should by all means be filled with wildlife. Today's fourth part of the upload. When I first heard about Dogman, I sneered at the idea, so I understand the doubt. It sounds insane to think something like this could exist. However, as I've heard many stories I thought sounded pretty credible, I started to open my mind to the possibility of cryptids. The wilderness, after all, is extremely vast. This idea was reinforced when I was watching some nature channel and discovered that the largest living redwood tree was just discovered a decade ago in Northern California. I thought to myself, if an enormous static tree can remain undiscovered for several hundred years, certainly a mobile, intelligent being could be extremely evasive. Fast forward a couple of years into my newfound fascination. One day I ran into a friend of mine and we started chatting. She said that she was going through tough times and she was living in a tent with her boyfriend and dog by the Rogue River in southern Oregon. She told me of strange events they were experiencing at night while sleeping in their tent. Something was coming into close proximity of their tent, making grunting and snorting sounds and occasionally a terrifying screaming sound that she could best describe as a woman wailing in distress. Even on occasion that they weren't hearing anything distinct, their large cane corso dog would take notice of a twig snap or an unremarkable noise, whimper, and then belly crawl onto them and proceed to whimper and shake in terror. While all this activity was mystifying to them, to me it sounded suspiciously similar to other events I've heard of. I made arrangements to go out to this property they were staying on, right along the Rogue River, to see if I saw any strange happenings. The first night there was nothing notable. However, I did speak with one of the people staying on the property, in a dwelling closer to the front of the property's house. I asked him if he'd ever seen anything strange on the property, and he told me that one night he had heard some kind of violent altercation occur near the river. The next day he went down to the river's edge, and on the muddy shores looked like two beings scraped it out. The ground was torn up, and it led into the river itself, leading him to believe something had killed something else and dragged it into the river. I asked him if he had any idea what was fighting. He had no idea, but he did mention his belief in a humanoid-type being that crawled on all fours, long-limbed gray skin, and moved extremely fast because of the long length of its slender arms. And for whatever reason, he didn't elaborate, believing they came out of the trees and would slither down them at night. Okay, weird. I'm pretty certain this guy's rolling the meth pipe pretty hard. The second night I was perched on the second-story deck of the house, facing the river. The friend that brought me to the property along with her boyfriend had left for the night. I didn't mind hanging out on the deck, as it was a warm summer night, and occasionally I would hang out with the house tenants and come back out to observe. The rear portion of the property is about a half-acre long and narrow in this area. To the right is an empty house, and even further to the right is an old lodge or retreat from the 50s that has long been abandoned and become decrepit. To the left sat a wrecking yard, separated by a 10-foot hedgerow that ran the entirety of the property down to the river. As I sat there on the deck chain-smoking, I had this internal dialogue with myself, and it asking it to reveal itself to me, projecting the thought of, "I come in peace and please don't kill me." As I sat on the deck smoking and reading, I heard twigs snapping and gentle rustling in the hedgerow. I stood up, gazing down at a sapling positioned closely to the hedgerow, and watched as the large silhouette appeared out of nothingness, somehow traversing the wall of nearly impenetrable hedgerow without causing any cacophony, save a twig snapping and a rustling of a few leaves, or somehow scaling down from a massive tree that sat along the river's edge. And while I could distinctly see this thing's silhouette, I was unable to make out distinctive features as it stayed just out of the illumination of the deck's nightlight. Although I didn't need to see it distinctly to know what it was, as its inner lit amber eyes were a telltale clue. No natural animal has eyes like this. Its eyes are not highly reflective like a cat's. They're literally creating light, glowing in amber light. Its eyes were separated by about 7 to 8 inches, and it stood about 7 feet tall. Simultaneously, as this entity stepped forward to make itself known, I saw at least a few sets of self-lit amber eyes peering through the hedgerow in my direction. I had prepared mentally for this moment. That's why I was there. I was scared. Who wouldn't be? But my curiosity outweighed my self-preservation at that time. The feeling I had gazing down on these beings can only be described as an adrenaline dump. It didn't show any aggression. It basically did what I hoped for. It came forward and presented itself. I stood there and stared at it for what seemed like 10 minutes, but in reality was about 30 seconds, before I internally projected respect and gratitude for the encounter, and turned and walked into the house. There is a second portion of this experience where at a later time I came back to this property and saw something else emerge from under the water in the river onto the river's bank, but this account has gotten way longer than I intended. Anyway, the whole point of this story was not really supposed to be about the encounter, but rather a query into other people think these beings are, and why we are hearing about more encounters and greater frequencies this day. My personal opinion is that these beings are interdimensional, capable of crossing the lower fourth to the upper third dimension via portals. That probably sounds wacky to some, but I've been pursuing this topic for a while, and through highly correlated synchronies and clues that just come to me randomly for the last several years, I have come to this conclusion. I feel that the Earth is a very remarkable point in time, having much to do with spiritual development and transcendence. The world is going to be thrown into chaos like we haven't seen since the last great cycle, and this dimensional crossing is part of the growing pains. Today's final encounter. Our family was out raking leaves at my great-grandparents' old homestead. I was a child of 10 or 11 years old at the time and helping out. I heard a strange sound. I was alone raking leaves in the front yard. I started looking around and saw something large with piercing red eyes staring at me. It looked to be as big as a tree. When I got my brother to come see, it was gone. My grandfather lived in a small town south of this sighting, and actually had something living in the bottoms down near their home, Hornbeck, Louisiana. He called it Zeke. It ranged in size from 4 feet to about 7 feet. Many saw it, smelled it, and heard its terrible yell. My grandfather he passed away recently, a Pentecostal minister. He told us many stories of things that happened around this area. We even got to see where he tried to get on top of their trailer and pushed it down at the end. This happened in the late 70s or early 80s. I never thought to report any of this because of how people look at you. My husband and I were oil field well watchers, and we had to stay in the area for about a week. Something came around, walking around our camp early in the morning and again around dusk. This area is just south of Gibbsland, Louisiana. We could always smell it and heard it growl. This would always raise the hair on the back of our necks. Really scary time for us. This happened in the early 80s as well. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I really enjoyed I enjoyed all of them, but the fourth part of the upload, I enjoyed the theory part. And unfortunately, people will have different theories and not really accept another person's theory, but I think we should all just kind of take all of them into account and then maybe just put them down, and we can honestly see that they will overlap and kind of blend into each other eventually. There's something going on, as we all know. Who knows what it is? We can only make speculation on that. But I think through the more research that is done, the more observation that is done, then we will find the truth, and only then. Also, I normally do not listen to any other people's channels, but someone reached out to me the other day, and I know a lot of you guys have said that Paranormal Roundtable Josh Turner has said some stuff about me on my channel, but I recently found out that his mom passed away, and I'd like to send my sympathies to him. I did message him on Messenger. We're not friends on Facebook, but hopefully he can see that, and it's a very sad time for him, so I feel very bad for him. I'm going through something very similar, and I only pray that he gets through this. So I hope you guys keep him in your prayers as well. Anyway, with that, I'm going to bid you farewell, and see ya!